Well, hello to everyone who is joining our webinar today, No Nonsense Service Management with FitSM. I appreciate you carving some time out of your day to be with us. So let's start with just a very quick agenda. My name is Ron Fagan. I am the Partner Relations Manager for APMG, and it's my pleasure to kick off today's session. And I'm joined today by our guest speaker, Mr. Mart Rovers, the principal at Interprom, and we'll learn more about Mart in just a few minutes. Following Mart's presentation, we'll have a brief Q&A, time permitting, before closing today's session. Next slide, please. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, and we will make the recording and the slides available afterwards. If you have a question, please type it into the questions window, the chat box, in the panel on your screen. And also, we'd love to get your feedback. So if you can send any comments or suggestions, either to me or to APMG or to Mart, we will be sure to get them to the right person and reply if that is required. Next slide, please. So let's start by addressing the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that is there really room for another IT service management framework? Has an ITIL already captured the prize? And the answer is, yes, we do have room for another IT service management framework. What the long experience of ITIL has demonstrated is that one size does not fit all. Different sizes and types of organizations have different requirements, and FitSM was designed to be adaptable. And you can see the highlighted words on the slide: pragmatic, achievable, accessible. These are key aspects of FitSM. Next slide, please. The other aspect to keep in mind is the open source nature of the framework. I think very few would argue that Linux, the open source operating system, hasn't had a huge impact on how operating system software is sourced. And the same can be true for methodologies. We have seen it with the creation of Praxis in the project and program management space. And we see it with FitSM in the IT service management space. FitSM incorporates the knowledge of an international community with experience in ITSM implementation. So with that, let me introduce our speaker, Mart Rovers, who will share his own insights on FitSM and where it belongs in the ITSM world. So briefly, Mart is the president of Interprom USA Corporation and ITSM Managers Incorporated. He is a board member of the Arizona ITSM Professionals and currently serves as the president of the ISO/IEC 20000 Special Interest Group. He has over 30 years of experience consulting and training in IT service management, information security management, enterprise risk management, and IT governance. He is certified in both FitSM and ITIL, holding the ITIL version 3 expert certification, along with the ISO/IEC 27001 professional and internal auditor certifications. He is an accredited instructor for FitSM, Business Relationship Management, ISO/IEC 20000, 27001, COPIT, VeriSM, and of course ITIL training courses. And he is also the author of the ISO/IEC 20000 Pocket Guide. With that, Mart, I will turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Estelle and Mark, for allowing me to present another webinar on behalf of APMG. It's always an honor. And thank you, everybody, for joining. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you, indeed, yet another, I shouldn't say yet, another framework standard in the service management world. It may come across as yet another one, and I'll elaborate on that as far as why this is worth for you to consider and to look into as far as how you can benefit from FitSM. Before I get into the nuts and bolts of what FitSM has to offer, I'm sure some of you recognize some of what is pictured here, as in you may have started the ITSM journey, and most of you may have started it with the help of ITIL, and some of you may have already gone down the path and maybe have become certified as individuals or as an organization against the ISO/IEC 20000 standard. But along the way, it has been a very typical experience that it wasn't always a straight path forward. You may have lost track, you may have lost some direction, you may have had some pushback as far as when is this thing ever going to be finished or done. And the good news is that there is a standard now that is actually very much within reach, which has a start and a finish line, so to speak, which gives you some clarity around, so what do I do going forward? Where do I begin? Where do I end? But what are the steps in between? It's definitely a lightweight, open source service management standard. I would emphasize the word standard in a little bit, since it does come with some advantages when it's a standard approach, not so much the framework approach. It does keep you focused, and it has proven to be successful for organizations. So already some nice success stories out there. Who came up with FitSM? It was actually the organization ITEMO, which stands for IT Education Management Organization, and which is based in Germany. It's a nonprofit partnership, and it actually started with a request almost from the European Committee to say we need something that we can use as some sort of a measuring stick for organizations when it's about service management. So the European Commission funded the project to get FitSM going. And when the project team started and was looking at, as in, hey, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, what's already out there, they definitely did look at ITIL, and one of the conclusions was it's kind of broad, it's kind of overwhelming, it's a lot, it's good, but it's just a lot. So the conclusion was made to more look at from a standard approach instead of a framework approach. And let me elaborate on that very quickly. ITIL, as we all know, is a framework. A framework allows you to pick and choose what works for you, what you would like to see to be improved in your organization. It's a free-for-all in a way. So it doesn't really have a beginning and an end or a structure, as in these are the steps to take. And that's, of course, the intent of a framework. You know, wherever you see the need to benefit from what ITIL has to offer, you know, that's where you focus on, and that's where you benefit from ITIL. Now, these ITIL adoption journeys have also resulted into sometimes endless journeys where at one point the lack of enthusiasm was gone, or direction was gone, or we got stuck too long in the operational phase around incident, problem, change, and never got to capacity, continuity, availability. With the standard approach, it's basically a list of best practices, just as we see in ITIL, but it clearly states, and these are the best practices you should be focusing on if you want to see that you progress not only from an operational perspective, but also get into these tactical and more strategic processes and practices. So that's why the organization chose to take a standard approach and come up with FitSM. ITEMO has partnered with APMG for exams. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. APMG being the leading world's leading organization in accreditation exams. So back to why another standard. We've been inundated the past year and a half with lots of new things coming to the service management market, like with VeriSM, with the new version of ITIL, with a new edition of 20,000. I mean, there was COVID that was introduced in 2019 with a new version. I mean, it's almost an endless list. So you may wonder, as in, you know, we already have so much out there. Do we need one more? And like Ron said, the answer is definitely yes. It's not so much to put more on your plate, but to make life easier for you. And if we know the Charlie Brown clip where, you know, Lucy is trying to hold that ball, and every time he's kicking it or about to kick it, she takes it away, and then he falls. And as in, of course, that's as in, we don't want to make the same mistakes and fall over and over again. So FitSM actually is playing a nice role here to avoid making the same mistakes and also have some faith into what service management standards have to offer and can offer. It's an open source service management standard, and it's actually the nice part of this is if you look at this link here that goes straight to the website of FitSM, it actually allows you to download the standards that comes with an assessment, that comes with implementation guidance. It has templates, it has training materials, and guess what? The beauty is you just click on it and you download it. It's all no charge. In other words, it's for free. So it's open source, and you can say, yes, well, it's definitely open. In other words, there is a lot of information available, and I'm going to elaborate on it, what it all means. It's put together in a diagram like this, as in it has, just like you see in many standards and frameworks, a list of terms and definitions. In the -0 documents, in -1, it has the requirements, more about that later. It shows objectives and activities of these requirements processes in -2. Has role models. I'm elaborating on that in a little bit as well. And then, as I said, implementation guidance, templates, implementation guides, and it has an assessment, a very nice assessment, actually. There's some logic behind it, as in, you basically go down the list and start with familiarizing yourself with terms and definitions, familiarize yourself with the requirements, and then it is about what are we aiming for. The objectives, what rules do we need to start implementing this, and what guidance do we have to implement all this. So there's some sequencing going on here, and simply by following these documents, it prepares you very well to start benefiting from these from the standards requirements. So when it's about where do we start, where do we end, here you see just one example that helps you, guiding you through the whole process. Another way of looking at it is in why FitSM, we already have 20,000, we already have ITIL. Maybe this helps to put a little bit in perspective. If you look at the requirements here for FitSM, it's actually a list of 95 to-dos, so to speak, as in action items for you. Or you could say these are 95 best practices. The new version of 20,000 has 213, is a little bit more. ITIL never made it into requirements because that was never the intent. It's about recommendations. And as you can tell, I mean, we never did the actual count of all the recommendations in ITIL, but I can tell you, for example, for change management in ITIL v3, there were over 300 recommendations. That number in itself, just for one process, may already come across as quite overwhelming. At the same time, it's very in-depth guidance, of course. And as we've seen with 20,000, many organizations definitely combine the requirements from the standard with the guidance from ITIL. So it's not as in you have to choose one or the other. Definitely combine them. They all have their own strengths. But again, the beauty of FitSM and ISO has always been that there was the beginning, start, and end, and this checklist idea of all the to-dos to work your way through these lists to say, hey, I have eventually a service management system in place. Both FitSM and 20,000 have that in common. The system approach, something that has been proven and is very powerful. The best way to describe it, and as we've seen in ITIL 4, it also now is a system approach. It's a step away from the life cycle approach. System approach basically means you're looking at a coherent system that you're going to implement in your organization or establish in your organization. And a nice metaphor that I usually use is to use that watch. You may have seen these watches, old watches, new watches, but once you open them, you see all these spinning wheels, these gears, and they all serve a certain purpose. They have a function. And the best way to compare these gears is with, let's say, for FitSM, 95 gears. Each has a purpose, has a function. One steers, the other one makes the other move. the other one move. Take one of those gears out and your system fails. Something doesn't function. Your date function may not work. Take out too many gears and a few things fall apart. We don't have anything to show for, let's say, availability management or continuity management. In other words, the system is failing at that time. The watch doesn't work. And by making sure that all these gears, serve a certain purpose, you actually, and you implement each of these gears, you implement a full-fledged management system, and in FitSM and ISO's case, a service management system, a system to manage services. 20,000, as we know, is auditable. And guess what? There is news, I think, it has not been announced to my knowledge, but I think it's coming very soon. FitSM will also be auditable, so you can have an independent third party taking a look at your management system and say, yes, it complies with the FitSM standard. So then it's assurance that you're definitely on the right track. ITIL was never intended to be auditable, so certainly not the case for the framework. If you look at the service management system with FitSM, maybe this diagram can give us a perspective of all these requirements. There are general requirements and the process requirements, each abbreviated to GR and PR. And you'll see general requirements in the service management system area, and then you'll see process requirements in the area around continual service improvements and in processes such as portfolio management, service reporting, and so on. So each of these processes has a set of requirements, a set of to-dos, or a set of best practices, it's all the same, for you to then focus on and get those implemented with the help of the guidance provided by FitSM, or maybe even complemented with a role model, or maybe complemented with an assessment, as in where are we with this process, what are the gaps, what is it that I need to focus on. So this would be the system that you would eventually put in place. And something to point out here is that typically what you'll see in these frameworks, such as ITIL, there is an enormous emphasis on processes, and then lately definitely more emphasis on services. What you'll see in the service management systems of FitSM and ISO, for example, is that emphasis on, hey, there is also a top management involved, as in leadership needs to be involved, needs to get involved. So what is it I'm expecting from my CIO or those reporting directly to him or her? As we all know, it takes leadership's commitment and active involvement to make service management successful. So it's therefore that FitSM has a few to-dos, so to speak, for people in top management positions. Another one that we'll definitely also recognize from other frameworks or standards is documentation. Not so much to kill more trees, but more about let's figure out how we work, what we do, and what it is that we should be doing, and just map it out all out in documents before we actually start executing on it, so we all sing from the same songbook, so to speak. Another aspect that you'll find in service management systems is the definition of a scope. What's in scope? The whole IT organization, all your services, or maybe a part of your services. In other words, the scope will then determine to which these requirements actually apply. And last but not least, service management systems typically follow some sort of an improvement approach. That could be Deming, it could also be other approaches that you have embraced, like a Six Sigma, for example. Following certain steps to get you from where you are today to bigger and better. So Deming is definitely still part of the current version of FitSM. Used to be part of the 20,000 standard that has been removed in the new edition. But it's still implied that you plan before you do something, as in think before you do something. And when you're doing something that you measure as in, am I still on the right track? Metrics come in, process metrics, process key performance indicators, service level targets come into play. Measuring, am I meeting my objectives of the organization, my objectives of my process? and then eventually the continual service improvement. This whole concept of, think before you do something, measure, are you on the right track and is there room for improvement, is incorporated in FitSM, but you'll also, of course, see that in other standards and frameworks. It's just more explicit in FitSM. FitSM has 14 processes. You saw that in the earlier diagram that I showed you. And these 14 processes actually capture 69 requirements. It's, in essence, as I said, a checklist, a to-do list of 69 to-dos. And you can check it off, meaning, for example, just pick on service portfolio management, where the requirement is, you shall have a service portfolio. In other words, we need to have a documented service portfolio. That would be one requirement. But it's one thing to put on a piece of paper that we have a service portfolio, but actually, are we also keeping it up to date? And if there's a new service that we need to introduce to the organization, or do we need to retire a service, are we acting on that? Do we produce the records to show that we actually keep this portfolio current? So each of the requirements for these processes, in essence, requires that we document what we're doing and that we also produce the records that show that we're doing what we're saying we're doing according to our documentation. For those that are familiar with 20,000, the one that most likely you'll notice doesn't show at this in FitSM is the one for budgeting and accounting for services, or financial management for IT services, if you think ITIL for a moment. With that in mind, I would like to go down the path of, so for which organizations would FitSM be a good fit? Definitely for the organizations that are small, mid-sized. In other words, I'd say, and these are just my numbers, this is not from ITEMO organization or APMG, or it's just my interpretation, and I can be wrong. But I'm thinking, if you have about 80, 100 people in IT, FitSM would be fantastic. If it's less than that, same thing. I've helped organizations that were, 20 in size, 20 employees, 30 employees in size, and trying to adopt ITIL can be humongous. Actually, I've certified an organization that had 24 people, and they certified them against 20,000. It's a humongous task in a way. FitSM, it would definitely be a much better fit for those types of organizations. Having said that, though, there are too many examples that I've experienced along the way that have gone down the ITIL path and got stuck or got confused or had a hard time showing progress, had a hard time showing, so and are we done with this? So there's definitely something, and I'll show you a slide in a moment, where you can complement also these initiatives around service management for larger organizations and use the FitSM measuring stick, so to speak, to say, are we still on the right track? Why aren't we progressing in this area? Why haven't we spent time on this requirement? So definitely something to consider, and I'll emphasize that again in a little bit from now. Here you see an example of FitSM requirements, and I picked configuration management. So each of the requirements easy to grasp, as in it has a shall statement in it, as in CI types and relationships shall be defined. The level details of CI information shall be recorded and needs to be sufficient to control these CIs. I mean, we can all read these requirements. And PR, as I said, stands for process. That's process number 11, and it has 6 requirements. And as you can tell, they're pretty basic, and that's the intent. These are the minimal things we should be doing at the very least when we do configuration management. And you can say that's the same thing for all the other processes of FitSM. Each of the requirements is something you should be doing at the very least. You can always do more, but let's do the basics first. Let's get all the gears in place first. And then if we want to add more gears to it, to add more functionalities and more fanciness to it, I mean, have at it, go for it. Definitely ISO IC 20000 and ITIL and VeriSM, they will all be good inspirational sources to do more. But let's do the basics first to get the watch going, so to speak. An example here about the role models. Here you see the list of generic ITSM roles that FitSM recommends, recommends. So some of them are very obvious, of course, service owners, process managers, but you'll also see as in somebody needs to own the system, the SMS, the service management system. So who is that going to be? In other words, who is keeping the watch going, so to speak, and make sure that the watch continues to improve in capabilities, for example. Even if you're deeply into ITIL or you're adopting ISO, I would say just take a look at these role models and see if there is maybe a responsibility for these roles that you don't see currently in your organization that you may want to consider incorporating. Here you see an example of the responsibilities of a service management system owner. I won't read them all, but in essence, what you'll see is somebody who is in charge, somebody who leads the organization towards bigger and better when it's about service management. Somebody who's very in tune with goals and objectives of the service management system that, of course, need to align with the objectives and goals of the organization. You cannot afford that you measure process performance one way and the organization is actually interested in something else. So just a few examples of what the SMS owner's responsibilities are. As far as implementation guidance, another one that is definitely worthwhile for you to download, as I said, at no charge. How do you identify services? How do you document the service specification? If I write documentation, what would be a checklist to follow as far as making sure that I have the right documents with the right content? It even has guidance around, so I'm meeting now all the requirements around FitSM, but I'm actually more interested to become 20,000 certified. So where do I go from here once I meet the requirements for FitSM? So there's even guidance to get you to a 20,000 certification. The self-assessment I pointed out earlier, it's a very nice spreadsheet. I highly recommend you download, and I definitely recommend this was one of the to-dos after this webinar, that you download the spreadsheet and do a quick self-assessment of what are these requirements of FitSM, and am I actually following and meeting these requirements? You do a self-assessment score. It can you write down the rationale for the score. Actually, that's also generated. It's quite intuitive. You just answer the question, and the spreadsheet will tell you where you're at, and also will tell you these are the areas I should be focusing on going forward. As I said, you're putting together a service management system with the bare minimum you should be doing at the very least. If you're down the path of adopting ITIL best practices for some time, and you would do this FitSM self-assessment, and you would show gaps in your current implementation of ITIL, I'd say you have a few to-dos, especially when you're already for years into the ITIL journey. As I said, and this sounds harsh, but you're actually not even doing the bare minimum, when you have gaps against FitSM. That's not to embarrass yourself. It's basically to refocus and start working on the things you might have been you should have been working on maybe some time ago. It helps you staying focused on, as I said, the bare minimum. So the self-assessment definitely something I would recommend you do. Speaking of going down the ITIL path, I mean, what has the road looked like, right? Was it bumpy or was it always easy? Has it been an uphill climb, or did you run into some roadblocks here and there? Were you sidetracked at times? The end was kind of foggy? Or was it actually a road to nowhere because there was no funding at one point anymore and we just let go of everything and we just stopped the whole show? Of course, it would be nice to have a path that looks like this. All well manicured, it's easy to follow, no bumps, no uphill climbs, the end is clear. this is where actually FitSM can fit in. It definitely helps avoiding, that the road is bumpy. As I said, there's a beginning, there's an end, there's a clear list of to-dos, there's guidance around it. It definitely will not be perceived as an uphill climb. I mean, 96, requirements is definitely doable. A checklist of 96, even for smaller sized organizations. It's definitely on the road to nowhere. Definitely when you have a service management system in place, whether that's against FitSM or ISO, IEC 20000, you can actually make a statement that at that time you can say, I'm at level 2 on a level 5 scale as far as maturity levels, where level 3 means, did I say 2? I should have said 3, as in, I have my process in place, things are defined, things are becoming more stable, I have services defined, service ownership, I measure service quality, I'm involved in customer satisfaction. I can see that my business is getting happier with the quality of our services. If things go wrong, we can respond to it faster, in a more coherent fashion, more efficiently, more effectively. It definitely gets you to the path of where things are smoother. Will FitSM get you there? Question mark. I would highly recommend you consider it. Complement whatever you're doing from a service management perspective with FitSM. Speaking of complementing your current ITIL efforts, adoption efforts with FitSM, it keeps you in check, as I said, with these the self-assessment. What is it that we're doing or not doing? FitSM also sets the boundaries, as I said. It talks about a scope of certification, a scope of the management system, I should say. In other words, what is within scope or what is not in scope. For smaller organizations, you most likely end up putting everything in scope, all your services, all your technology, all your locations. You may only have one location. But for larger organizations, it could also help with determining which locations, which services should we take on first and improve first with the help of the guidance that we get from FitSM, and then complement that with the recommendations from frameworks such as ITIL or COBIT to say, okay, I get the requirements, I need CIs, configuration items, but what would be the typical attributes that we record for as a configuration item? FitSM will not dictate which attributes you must have. It in essence says, make sure you have them. And then, of course, then we reach out to a framework like ITIL, for example, where it says, hey, for a configuration item, you may want to consider these attributes. Also in ISO IEC 20000-2, you'll find recommendations along the same line. So in other words, don't get stuck on one framework or standard. Be open to it, and since FitSM is definitely open source, in other words, it has set itself up so you can complement FitSM with other things that are out there. If you end up seeking 20,000 certification, FitSM definitely gets you on the right track. It was also designed with that in mind for organizations to be a jumping board to get you going on the ISO IEC 20000 certification. It gets you there. I don't know. It will depend what you have in place. Somewhere between 50, maybe 40, 60% or so. There will be additional requirements in 20,000. As we saw, it has 213 requirements. It's a little bit more. But as I said, it's not in vain if you have gone down the path of meeting the FitSM requirements. So keep that in mind as well. As far as next steps, I really recommend that you download those free FitSM materials that I pointed out earlier. Identify some subject matter experts in your organization that would be interested or would have some vested interest in what FitSM has to offer, and definitely take a look at the material that is there for free. maybe repeat this webinar for the people that you work with, as in, you know what, it might be worthwhile looking at. Maybe do a FitSM certification class to see if you can add to your credentials some systematic approach around adopting service management, and definitely conduct that self-assessment to see where you're at with your current practices. If you haven't gone down the path of adopting service management, I highly recommend that you take on FitSM and learn from it and start applying what FitSM has to offer. As I said, the terms and definitions, the part of vocabulary, the requirements, the role models, the implementation guides. The whole path is laid out for you. Download it and go down that path. There is enough information out there to get you going at the very least. As I said, if you need training, that's available. Even the training materials that FitSM that come with FitSM that you can also, of course, use and reuse. Now, create your plan, service management improvement plan, with FitSM in mind. Look at your current improvement plan and compare that with what the self-assessment is telling you. As in, are we going down the right track with our service management initiatives? And if we do want to start working on the more tactical and strategic processes, what is that we should be doing? And then complement your improvement plans with these FitSM requirements of those specific areas. Start implementing, but also start measuring, of course, and then go back to number 2, to maybe expand on your scope, as in including more services or including more locations, maybe other areas of technologies. In other words, get more people on the FitSM bandwagon. And as I said, this can be iterative. You know, you could definitely say, no, we start with the operational processes first, and then we'll move down the path of doing more technical processes and make it agile that way. But eventually you can say there's a clear end goal. There's a clear end state once we meet all the requirements that we have a comprehensive service management system in place that produces quality services that's based on repeatable, predictable processes where there's clarity around roles and responsibilities, and where we can say we have accomplished a stable management system that we can build on with more processes or with maybe more roles or more services or more locations, but at least your foundation is stable. So maybe look at a FitSM that way. It lays down a stable foundation that you can build upon with anything else you do along the lines of service management, but even on other areas such as continuity, service continuity management, information security management, or risk management, or project management. At least just your foundation is stable. A few words about the certification training. There's a 1-day foundation course. There are 2-day advanced courses, and there's an expert level course. And if you look at the time investment that is required, it's much less than what you're used to in some of these ITIL, COVID, and other ITIL courses. Again, it's lightweight. It's the bare minimum. So let's do that first. So let's focus on that first. With your ITIL background, and if you have an ISO IC 20000 background, either way, these exams, having taken them myself, are very doable. It's not as in you're up for a big task. There you will recognize a lot, as in this is definitely something that I already know. There might be a few tweaks, as in, yeah, that's specific. But that's the minority in actions as far as what to expect from these exams. Definitely doable, and again, it gets you on a fast track to get focused on what should be done. Ron, that's what I had in mind.
Fantastic.
Go to questions.
No, let me first say thanks for doing such a great job. You know, again, FitSM is new to a lot of people, and I think you've positioned it beautifully, and especially as so many people, you know, have gone down the ITIL path, and that has worked for some and not worked for others. So, I mean, I think this represents an excellent option. for people who are looking to either replace, complement, or check on their ITSM implementation. And I'd like to say there is a kind of a call to action here, and Mart has agreed that if you're interested in talking a bit more about this, if you have questions that just didn't come up during this session, if again you'd like to just see how this might work in your organization, Mart has offered a half-hour phone conversation with you. There is no obligation, there is no fee, and yes, indeed, there is something in this world for free. So I do actually recommend that you take advantage of this. There is nothing to lose, and I think a lot of insight to be gained. We will give Mart's kind of contact information at the end of the webinar, so please be on the lookout for that. Next slide, please. So with that, we do have time for a few questions. So Mart, I will kind of pose these to you. First one, it says, how long does FitSM take? I guess I would interpret that as saying, how long does it take to implement something like FitSM, although it could be broader in terms of, getting up to the skill level. But I'll leave it to you to interpret that question and provide the response.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Yeah, that's a good question. And I should have mentioned that, of course. So I don't want to go down the path of, well, it depends. But let me give you a number. So I would say between 6 months, that's pushing it, but up to a year, year and a half. And I'm not trying to put fear in this answer. As we all know, service management it's more than just documenting a few processes and designing a few services and buying a service management tool and get that going, assigning a few roles and responsibilities to people, and then keeping our fingers crossed. It's actually, we're talking about, we need to change the way we think, we work. It's a cultural change. Same for FitSM, no exceptions. But again, the beauty is there's a beginning and an end. And the end definitely means I've met all the requirements and I have something to show for all these requirements. And for smaller organizations, and if there is enough drive and push, I'd say 6 months should be doable. It's pushing it. I would say more the average would be a year, with keeping in mind that, business goes on. We're all busy and we're going to do a few things in addition. So it may stretch to a year and a half. If it lasts longer, it doesn't mean something is wrong, but you may have to question, as in, if we're not even doing the bare minimum in 2 years from now, we may have a more serious problem.
All right, thanks. We've got two questions now that kind of look similar to me, not quite, but let me put them together and toss them over to you. The first one is, would it work for new starters who are awaiting ITIL training? And the second question is, could it work for employees that have had ITIL training but need to just get started as with an implementation? So, again, somewhat similar. How does it work for new people or people who have had some training but just are ready to get going?
As far as taking the courses, Ron, is that the question?
Well, I would say for taking the courses, but probably more in terms of, taking the courses, and then is it appropriate, is FitSM appropriate for new starters take the course and then again start down the path of FitSM implementation?
Yes, definitely yes. Even if you're ITIL certified or definitely or COVID certified. As I mentioned in one of the slides, the approach that FitSM has chosen, just like ISO did, is to go down the path of a service management system. As in, we need to put in place a service management system. It's something that you won't find in ITIL v3. ITIL 4 talks about the value system, service value system, which is actually much broader. But again, the system approach is new for most of us. And I would say that's definitely one of the biggest takeaways when you take these FitSM courses. Plus the fact that the requirements around the organizational aspects, the alignment between, a process performance, service performance, organizational performance. It's not a secret, but it's much more emphasized in these standards such as FitSM and ISO. there will be definitely parts in these courses that you say, yep, I heard it, I know, I get it. But it also is helpful when it helps you focusing on the bare minimum. It could be a huge aha moment, as in, you know, we've been dabbling in incident management, problem management for so long, and we're trying to do this and this and this. And now I finally hear, oh, I should have, well, I shouldn't say stopped, but, you know, once we had the bare minimum in place, we could have moved on to the next process or the next service. So those are just a few points and highlights that say that are huge takeaways from these courses.
All right, and last question we have is, again, regarding FitSM and ISO 20000. Is there room for both in an organization, or would you select one over another?
They can definitely go together. If you're 20,000 certified, different story, right? I would say there's maybe a few takeaways from what FitSM has to offer. However, if you're not 20,000 certified as an organization, you're still seeking certification, and you've come across resistance, as in this is taking too long, we're not seeing enough progress, maybe scale back your implementation to a FitSM focus and comply with the FitSM requirements first, and then build on that foundation to go further for to meet the remaining 20,000 requirements. The requirements actually align very nicely between FitSM and 20,000. I'd say it's a 98% match with a few exceptions, but it's nothing major. It's not something that you cannot overcome. That 2% difference. So I would say if even in organizations where 20,000 is not there's no appetite for that at all, but you as a service management enthusiast, you know that 20,000 can give you some advantages. Knowing that once you use the word ISO, that people will start resisting, as in no way. Definitely consider the FitSM approach. It's definitely something that may come across as not as daunting, and it could be your jumping board, you know, as in, hey, if we couldn't do FitSM, we can do more. So sometimes use it as a tool for you internally. Sometimes it's better to not even mention that you follow FitSM requirements. I've seen the same with 20,000 requirements, as in it's not even mentioned. But the checklist, as in these 96 requirements of FitSM, is in essence your project plan or your improvement plan or your measuring stick to see that you're on the right track with, let's say, ISO or ITIL or COBIT, you name it. So definitely go hand in hand.
All right, great, thank you. Well, let's flip to the last slide, and
Okay.
you know, with that, we will kind of wrap up the webinar. Mart, I want to thank you for taking all the time to do the presentation today, and certainly all the preparation that went into it. And I would certainly like to thank all of the attendees out there for taking the time out of your day to join us. So as mentioned, this is recorded. Please do not hesitate to take a look at it later to kind of reinforce whatever you heard. And with that, I will wish everybody a good remainder of your day. Thank you very much for attending.